Hello, in this video we're going to continue our setup for our virtual data center using this logical network diagram that we had in the first video. So what we need to do in this video is to set up remote management and to set up the clustering of the HyperV1 and the HyperV2 machines together. And if we get time, we'll also do some testing of the functionality of the virtual machine that we set. Okay, so moving to our we'll try all of our machines. So if I move to my PDC and have a log into that. Okay, what we need to do to make sure we've got remote management is to make sure that we've got that turned on. So on our local server here, we need to make sure that we've got remote management and remote desktop turned on. So I've got both of those enabled, which is what I need for here. We need to check. If it's not, then what you do is you just click in here and enable it. When you do, allow connections only from computers running remote desktop with network level authentication, which is what's recommended. So you tick this radio button and tick this box here as well. Okay, so we'll check the same thing for our HyperV1 and our HyperV2. Okay, so obviously I didn't shut this down properly. So let's check on the local server. Okay, and you can see I've got both of these enabled. So remote management and remote desktop. That's what we need. And let's just check our HyperV2. Click on the local server. Okay, so remote management's enabled, but the remote desktop is not. So we'll allow that and make sure that dialog box was to allow you to set up the firewall to allow that to come through. That's all. I just flicked through it, so apologies for that. I can go cancel and back in. That way we can see it properly. So when I go like that, it comes up with remote desktop firewall exception will be enabled. So it enables the ability for us to remote desktop through the firewall. Okay. Okay, so we go like that. Okay, so we've got refresh, and that will come up as enabled. Yep, there it is. Okay, so we've got the remote desktop and remote management enabled on all three machines. The next thing that we need to do is to we need to download and install the Windows Administration Manager. So we've got that on our OneDrive. So if I just right mouse click and open a file explorer, and I'll head to my local version of that, OneDrive. So you guys can access these VM resources, and you'll see in the software folder there is a Windows Admin Center. So it's just this Windows Admin Center 2103.msi. So you just right mouse click on that and go install. Okay, and when you do that, It's a Microsoft product. It's a free download from the Microsoft website. And what that looks like is, I've got it down here on my taskbar. So when I open it up, oh, it tells me that updates are available. Oh no, that was in the actual virtual machine. So it's got, I've already got my PDC, my HV1 in there, but we need to do this with all three machines. So I'll show you how to add another connection. So I'm going to add a connection, and I'm going to pick a server. And you notice I'm using the IP addresses from the local host network card. So I'm using the 192.168.64 subnet. So if we have a quick look at that, we're using this blue network here, so 192.168.64. So I'm using Windows Admin Manager on the host machine, and I'm using this host-only network card to manage these three machines. Okay, so I've already got 230 in, I've got 231 in, I'm just about to put 232 in. Okay, so I'm going to I'll enter the server name, and you can do this, you can actually put the name in, you can search Active Directory, all that sort of stuff. I'm just going to put in 192.168.64.232. And I'm going to use not my Windows account, I'm going to use another account. I'm going to use the probably the BMW. I'll just use the administrator and the usual password. Add with credentials. So it's found hv2.bmw.local, which is good. Now the secret is don't hit the add straight away. Wait for it to pop up in there itself. Now I've never connected to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just click on this. It'll connect to it. And what we get is an overview of the machine. So in this particular case, this server's got 1.5 gigabytes of memory. I'm currently using 1.3 gigabytes of the 1.5, so I've got 240 megabytes available, which is enough to run one zero shell virtual machine in there. Okay, so we're going to do that later on, once we've set everything up, all the clustering up. And what we can see down here is it knows about virtual machines and virtual switches. We can also roles and features, and the idea here is the remote desktop. Now we enabled the remote desktop and the remote management, so I can click on that, and it's going to log in as, I'm going to log in as the BMW /administrator and the password. Automatically connect via the certificate presented by this machine. So we'll confirm the certificate and connect. It's getting there. Okay, so that's the virtual machine. You can send a Control-Alt-Delete, or you can disconnect. So if I minimize that and went back to the actual virtual machine, it actually logs you out while you're remoted in. But so we can do roles and features, and then we can remote into it and run it if we need to. And you've got access to all of the power on, power off, all that sort of stuff. It's just got it, in my case, in this sort of widescreen format. That's okay, perfectly fine. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to use this to install, we're going to set up our HyperV switches, and we're going to add the failover clustering feature in using the roles and features here. So what we'll do first of all is go back and check our HyperV switches. So we're moving on now from, here we're actually remoting the machines. We're going to now look at setting up the clustering side of things. So I'm just going to flick back to all connections, and I'm going to go back to the HV1. I'll do the same thing. I'm going to log in as the administrator, and I'm going to use credentials for all these connections and go continue. Okay, so you can see that I've got access to the same sorts of things. I can look at the processes and the registry and the remote desktop and roles and features. So what we need to do is go to the roles and features. Well, actually, the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to have a look at the HyperV virtual switches, which we can have a look at down here. So there's the virtual switches. And the important thing here is to make sure that we've got everything set up identically between HyperV1 and HyperV2, because our virtual machines use that environment. And when we move it from that virtual machine that might be running from one server to the other, then the setup needs to be the same. So in here, we've got an internet switch that's connected. It's external, and it's shared with the management operating system. Okay, so we just need to make sure that if I click on that, look at its settings, we need to make sure that the HyperV2 is the same. So I might just start up another version of that and pop in my HyperV2 in on that one. These are just other more tabs on a browser, so it's not too bad. I can just flick between them. Okay, so we're going to whiz down and have a look at the virtual switches on this as well. And it has one, but it doesn't appear to have the same name. So we've got one called Internet, and it's connected to our N0 Internet network adapter. Okay, and it's an external switch. That means it'll get out to the internet. Anything that's connected to this will get out to the internet. Let's make sure that this is the same. It's currently a little bit different, so let's look at the settings on this. Hopefully it just needs a rename. Okay, it's connected to Ethernet 0. You can see all these cards aren't named the same way as HV1. I would like to actually change them all because otherwise it gets confusing. So if we've got all the same names, you know how on here we've got N1's management and it's the 64, and N0's out to the internet, and network adapter, you know, storage is 10.10, it's the 10 subnet, and the heartbeat network is the 172.25.11 subnet. Now we've got those same subnets here, just the name's not the same. So I'm wondering whether I can rename these. Can I just click on these? It doesn't look like I can. I can change the name, I think. Call that internet. Save. Okay, it's called internet and it is connected to Ethernet 0. But what I want to do is actually go and change these things, how they actually are on the actual machine itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remote into the desktop and do it that way. That's the fun part. Okay, and we've got all our machines here, but they're just called Ethernet whatever. Okay, so let's come up with the network connections. I think I called that like NIC 0 internet, I think is what I called that. So if I rename it, N0-internet. Let's just make sure that's the way it is there. Lowercase n0. Okay, so let's make it identical. Internet. Okay. So network card 1 is the management. That's the 164. So let's just check that that's what it actually is. Diagnose and details. That is the 64 network. So this is going to be renamed to N1-management. And that's what it's called. N2 is storage and N3 is heartbeat. Let's check the properties. Actually, I probably should have. Doesn't matter. I can go to IP version 4. That's the 10, so that's definitely the storage. I'm just making sure. Rename it. So let's go N2-storage. And that has to be N3-heartbeat. And I'll just make sure that that's all lowercase. Yes, it is. Heartbeat. Okay, so I've renamed all the network cards. I'm going to do a refresh on here. It should change the names. So we can see the names have all changed, which is what I was after. And so if I disconnect from that and come back down into the virtual switches, let's see what it pops up with this time. Okay, it pops up that it's internet, which was what we told it to do. And if I was going to go new, no, actually I won't. I'll cancel that. The important thing is this N0 is called internet, and the same. It is the same on here as well. So if we click on the settings, okay, we can see that we've got it all set up exactly the same way as HV1, HV2, same thing. HV1, all the IP addresses are 231. HV2, all the IP addresses are 232. And okay, they're sorted in different order, but that's okay. Okay, so now we've made sure that the HyperV switch that goes out to the internet is the same. It's called internet. All the network cards are the same, except for the IP address, obviously. So now it's a matter of going on to adding the feature, the failover clustering feature. So we're going to go to roles and features. And it's in the features, not in the roles. So here's the failover clustering. So we want to tick that box there and go install. We do the same thing on HyperV2. I'm going to go down to failover clustering, tick the box and go install. You can see that this is a little bit easier than so it'll do all this sort of stuff. So we're just going to go. I don't think it has to reboot the server, so we can just go tick, and that'll do the install. So you can see it's starting the installation there. So we'll hit yes, yes, tick in the box and go and install it, and hitting yes that's about it. That looks like it's installed. We've got a tick box. Okay. Refresh the screen. Do the same on this one. Refresh the screen. Flick back. So the failover clustering, it says install pending. Successfully completed the installation of failover clustering. Go to roles and whatever. So it says install pending, but if I do refresh again, it'll come that it's installed. No, still says install pending. Okay, let's look at the other one. Okay, so I think it's just a matter of waiting for it to finish its installation. I might just whiz back up to the top here and look at the overview and see if it's hammering the CPU or something like that. Memory's a bit higher, CPU's not really doing that much. Had a bit of a spike, but it's sort of settled down again, so okay. Let's whiz back into roles and features. Still says install pending. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remote in and see what it's doing. This is, I mean, obviously you'd have to just sit here and wait for it normally. Must take a little bit of time. So remote desktop. Okay. So So if I look at the tools, it's working too slow. The HyperV manager's there. Nice, so it hasn't finished doing the install yet, which is what it was telling us anyway. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just pause the video until this thing's finished. So I'll just do a quick refresh on that. It still says install pending, so I'll just pause and we will wait until it's actually completed the install. Okay, I think there's probably an issue with this doing an install. If I switch back to the other one, go onto the dashboard, no notifications. Let's go to dashboard, let's go to add roles and features and just have a quick check. Okay, destination server has a pending restart. I recommend you restart the server before either installing or removing roles in this feature. Okay, so maybe some of those updates that were happening in the background required a restart before we could actually do an install. So we'll tell the computer to do a restart and see how it goes. Do a restart. Plans for operating system reconfiguration. Just go planned. That'll do. Continue. So that was on that one. Let's do the same thing on here as well. So let's go back up to overview. And do a restart. Whoops, has a restart. Okay, so it actually tells us up in here as well, restart. Okay, so let's reconnect. And HyperV1 connecting. It's doing a restart, so oh, your credentials didn't work, try again. HyperV1, continue. Okay, maybe it's not up yet. Maybe the machines are not up yet. Still updating features, okay. HyperV2 does seem to think that it's okay. Okay. I'm just going to go back and check the I can use the Windows remote tool, or I can just use the virtual machine native. Okay, so it's still doing something in the background. Next. Failover clustering, it says it's now installed. Okay. Good. So let's move back to here. We should be able to connect to it now. Yeah. Okay, and when we look at the tools, we can see Failover Cluster Manager. And we're going to look at the same thing on here. Continue. Didn't work. What's it still up to? It's still working on features. Okay. Okay, so it's finished doing its update. So this credential should log in. No, it's not. Why is it not going in? Okay. Let's go in. Manually. Okay, so again, let's just check the roles and features. So in the long run, remoting it using the Windows admin tool turned out to be the slow way of doing it. And it still hasn't finished yet, still doing stuff in the background. So even though it's got to the login stage, it's not really ready yet. Okay, so we can see now that the failover clustering is now installed, which is what we wanted to see. Okay, which means on the tools we'll be able to see the failover cluster manager. Okay, so I'm going to go back to here to see whether I can get this thing to connect again. It did connect, and I should be able to remote desktop it. It's just a matter of waiting for it to finish doing the install. So yes, it is working. It's just taking its time. Okay, so I've remoted in on both machines, and I can see the failover cluster manager on both machines. So what we're going to do is we've installed the failover clustering, so we've got this failover cluster manager. What we now need to do is quite important. We need to do, using this failover cluster manager, try managing with Windows. That's what I'm doing. Don't show this message again. Okay. So here's our failover cluster manager. And what we need to do is validate the current configuration that we've got. So I'm going to click on that. Okay, I've had a little bit of a play around to figure out what the problems are, a bit of troubleshooting, and I know what it is. So what I'm going to do is I fixed it on HV1. I'm going to click on HV2 and log in. when we were in the HyperV manager and we made our virtual switch, actually when we install HyperV, it takes over the original internet card. And when we go to the virtual switch manager, we're connecting it to this network card here. And when we have a look at what that looks like using the local server manager, if you remember, yes, we renamed these things, but we put static IP addresses on everything, remember? And we put a static IP address on the 192.168.1 subnet as well. But look what installing HyperV's done. It's turned it into a DHCP address. And this is something I didn't tweak to just a minute ago. If I have a look using ipconfig/all, our problem is that we've got DHCP enabled on this V Ethernet card, and it's got a 1.65. Now this is HV2, it should have a 1.232 because that's what we did statically to get around the problems that we had when we were doing dynamic IP addresses. But HyperV has put it back to being a DHCP address. So what we need to do is put it back to being static again. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to go into, it doesn't pick any card, doesn't matter, because we're going to right mouse click on our V Ethernet card and go properties. I'm going to turn off quality of service packet scheduler because I want all the bandwidth. And I'm going to look at the properties of this thing, and I'm going to go use the following static IP addresses. And that's got to be 254. This has got to be 192.168.1.232 because this is HV2. That's the right IP address. The default gateway is 254, but the DNS server 192.168.1.230. Why have I got two? I don't know. It's got two gateways for some reason. DNS is now correct. Yep, that's good. Okay. That will fix the problems. IP addresses and DNS not pointing in the right direction, all that sort of stuff is what's happened when we've installed, and you'll notice all these things all of a sudden popped up bmw.local. It's now picking up. It's because it's contacting the bmw.local domain server DNS, which was at 230. That's the DNS setting. Okay, so if I do a refresh on that, it'll give me the right IP address. Yep, 232. Everything's 232. That's what we wanted. Okay, and our virtual switch is what's connected to this thing here, and that's what its IP address is. Gateway, all that sort of stuff is now working. So let's go have a look at what we were trying to do in the first place. Let's go to HyperV1 and tools and failover clustering. That's what we're trying to do in the first place. Okay, so we're going to hit validate configuration. I'm going to go next. And we're going to browse. And advanced and find now, and it finds all of, because DNS finds everything. So I want those two servers are the ones that I want to validate. HyperV1, HyperV2. Picks them all up. Perfect. It's DNS. If we don't have DNS working properly, we don't, it just doesn't work. So DNS is really important. We're going to run all of the tests and go next. And so what this is doing is it's checking the configuration we've got on both Hyper-V servers, and later on we'll look at the iSCSI storage and all that sort of stuff as well. Okay, so this is now finished running the tests, and there's a couple of warnings in there, so I'm going to view the report. Don't use recommended settings. Ask me later. For some reason it uses Internet Explorer or whatever it is. Yeah, Internet Explorer. Nice. Maximize it so we can see what we're doing. So I've got a network warning and a system configuration warning. So let's have a quick look. Validate IP configuration. Okay, so I've got a local area network connect 10. It's got like a number here that's failover cluster virtual adapter. That's okay. We'll give it a number HV2. The failover cluster virtual adapter IP address. Interesting. I wonder whether that's because we staticked the host's adapter. Yeah, it's all tricky, isn't it? And so then does the Hyper-V's virtual adapter need to have a DHCP address in order to get an IP address? Interesting. Okay, let's have a quick look, shall we? What we're doing is going under the hood for Hyper-V. It's almost as though within the domain we should have had it as a private little subnet, not connected to our outside network. Interesting. Our design's causing us a problem, I think. Anyway, at the moment I'm just going to go finish. Let's try and create the cluster. Okay, don't show this page again. So I'm going to tap in the same two servers. Advanced, find now, it'll pick up HV1, HV2, go OK. Okay, so here it's which network are we going to use? The net BIOS name for the cluster name. And here's our 4 network cards. So this is the management network, so we don't want to actually use that. We want the cluster to use the storage network, which is the 10 subnet. So we want to turn off the heartbeat network, and we want to also turn off the way out to the internet. So in here, we need to set up what our cluster, so that's our storage, isn't it? Heartbeat storage. Interesting. Which network should we use? Type the name that you want when administering the cluster. So this is going to be administering the cluster. So not administering the machines. So administering the machines is that network. This is really the storage network, so we don't want to use that. We want that just to be dedicated to just doing storage. The 11 subnet is for the heartbeat. Which we'll use, type the name you want to use the name you want to use when administering. So this is the cluster name. So I'm going to use the 1 subnet. And I'm going to pick an address in here. Okay. So we've got 230, 231, 232. So if I go 233 is the cluster. Okay. And we're going to call this this is the home test lab for Red Opal in Network Engineer. So let's call it just HyperV we can call it any name we want, really. HyperV cluster. It's not very original, is it? Or you could call it a home lab HyperV cluster. I don't know. HV cluster will do. We call it HV1 and HV2 as the actual node. So HV cluster will do as the name. And we're going to go next. These things get registered in DNS. Okay, so add all eligible storage to the cluster. So that's going to use the quorum and the virtual machine disks, which is Q and V. We're going to go next on that. You might have noticed it was actually putting stuff into Active Directory there, just a little bit back. So if we go back to our Active Directory server, you'll see that it's now got the name of this HV cluster in there as well. So if we go and have a look at our PDC, and have a look at our Active Directory. It's not open at the moment. Tools, Active Directory users and computers. So there's our HV cluster. It's a failover cluster. That's network name account. So there's that new one that we just created. So So it's a member of the Active Directory, and the other thing that's interesting is it'll also be in DNS. So if we have a look at in here, here's HV cluster, and you can see it's 233. We told it it's 233. There it is. Okay, so this actually looks all okay at the moment. So let's switch back to HyperV1. You've successfully completed the Create Cluster Wizard, and we can view the report on this. Again, it's going to go out. Internet Explorer restricted this web page from running scripts or ActiveX. Well, whatever. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of stuff there that we could gives you excruciating detail about creating the cluster, which, you know, we're fine with. Okay, so let's go finish. And we can see our cluster has now turned up. There it is. And roles, nodes, storage, networks, and all that sort of stuff. No events in the last hour. Okay. So we've created both. What we need to do is look at the storage. So if we have a look at the storage, we tick the box so that it created the disks for us. So it knows that currently the node owner is HV1, cluster disk 2, witness is a quorum, which is the 1 gigabyte, and the cluster 1, which is the available storage, is 50 gigabytes. But what we really need to do is we need to add this drive as cluster shared storage. Okay, so it says available storage. It doesn't. The witness is there, but the available storage. So what we need to do is, if we do a right mouse click on this, what we need to do is add to clustered shared volumes. So now it's a clustered shared volume, which means both HV1 and HV2 can see it. Okay, it's still the same. But what you can see now is we don't have a drive letter against it. On this one here, we've still got drive Q for quorum, and this one was drive V for virtual machines. But now it's actually got a folder on. So what happens is it creates a link on our drive C as 50 gigabytes. And it's an interesting way to do it. You know, it could do it. I would think it could do it either way, but that's okay. So, so what we need to do now that we've got the failover cluster manager stuff in place, have we set the roles? We haven't set the roles. We need to create the virtual machines first, and then we've got the nodes here. So it knows about HyperV 1 and 2. Knows about the disks. They're both online. We've put that one into the shared volume. It knows all about different networks. Okay. We've got live migration settings up there. Okay, but we don't have virtual machines in here yet, so once we've got virtual machines running, then we can do that. Okay, so let's minimize this out of the road for the moment, and what we'll do is go to the HyperV manager. Okay, and what we need to do is we need to set up the HyperV settings to use the clustered storage. Okay, so what we're going to do is, currently you'll see that this is set to our profile, users, public, whatever. So we need to change that. We're going to point it to drive C, and here's our cluster storage, volume 1. And what we do is create a new folder. Okay, so this is for hard disks. So let's go new folder. Now HyperV calls them VHDs, so I'm just going to call them VHDs. That's where they're going to go. And we'll select that folder. And the virtual machines themselves, I want to put them not in this. I want to do the same thing, put it onto the clustered storage. The reason being is that then HyperV 1 and 2 can see it, and once that's shared storage, then if one of them fails, the other one can pick up the machine because it's located on the shared storage. So go to drive C, cluster storage, volume 1. Let's create a new folder for this is the virtual machines. This is really the settings of the virtual machines. Well, it's actually the virtual machines, but the hard drives are sort of kept separately. So let's rename this to VMs will do. Virtual machines. So we've got virtual machines and virtual machine hard drives, like separate things. So virtual machines and virtual hard disks, VHDs and VMs. Okay. And we can see, looking at both of those there, they all point to that cluster storage. That's what we want. Okay, so what we're going to do is just check to make sure, like if these are clustered, then it should be the same on both machines. Okay, so that's the settings I've got there. Let's move across to HyperV 2. Let's go okay. Tools, let's go to Failover Cluster Manager. That one. Okay, and you can see it's picked up the HyperV cluster that we've got, that we've created, because these two machines are now clustered. So storage-wise, disks, you can see the shared clustered volume and the witness. The networks, all the same. Disks are the same. Nodes, you can see Hyper-V 1 and 2 are up, and we don't have any roles to put yet. When we configure the first virtual machine, then we'll set that role. Okay, so the failover cluster manager in HV2 is the same as HV1. So let's just check the Hyper-V manager. we do need to make sure that the settings in this virtual machine, there's no virtual machines in here, the HyperV settings, see these are still set to the public. So what we need to do is to change these to the same location. There's our cluster storage, there's our volume 1, there's our VHDs. So I'm going to select that folder for the virtual hard disks, and for the virtual machines I'll select the same VMs folder. There it is. So now the virtual machine, HyperV virtual machine settings are all set to the same clustered storage, which means it doesn't, either one of them are going to see the same virtual machines. And this thing actually points to the iSCSI target, which is actually on the PDC. Okay, so it's all come around from that. Okay, so I think at this particular point we're up to creating a zero shell, making sure that it's on the shared clustered storage. And then we could check to make sure that all the settings are done right on the virtual machine, and then we can test for live migrations and things like that. So it doesn't really matter which machine we do it on. I'm going to do it on HV1 just because that's what I normally do. HyperV Manager, it's not open, so let's open it. Okay, so I want to create a virtual machine and I want to install Zero Shell onto it. So on this computer, how am I going to get the ISO image for it? What I'm going to do is I'm going to mount it onto this virtual machine here. So there's a couple of ways we could do this. I can go to manage, and on the virtual machine settings in the options I can create a shared folder and I can push it, well it's already there, map as a network drive in Windows guests, so it should come up as a T, as a OneDrive, VM resources. Let's see if that is the case. So on this virtual machine here, I don't see a drive T. There's no drive T. What's in that CD-ROM? I think what I did last time was I mounted, let's open in a new window. Yeah, what I did was I actually mounted the ISO image into this drive D here. So how do you do that? Easiest way is back to here on players, settings. What I can do is I can mount, what I've done is I've mounted the ISO image for the Zero Shell. That's what I've done. So on the CD-ROM drive, I've used an ISO image for the Zero Shell. I've gone and browsed and found it locally. So that's mounted that ISO image into the CD-ROM on this local machine here. And its drive is drive D. Okay, so it's drive D. So this CD-ROM contains the ISO image for Zero Shell. What we want to do is have our virtual machine use that CD-ROM drive D. Okay, so what we're going to do is, I lost the mouse again, here it is, it's back. Let's go to here, let's go, let's go new virtual machine. Let's call this Zero Shell. Now you'll notice that it automatically is going to put it in the right place for us. See cluster storage volume 1, which is our cluster shared volume, which is our iSCSI disk on our. So I'm not going to bother ticking and then pointing it to it. It's going to go in the right place anyway because we changed that. Next, this virtual machine, your virtualizer has a UEFI based firmware, so we'll just use generation 1. Startup memory. Now, remembering that this virtual machine's only got 1.5 gigabytes, we want a very small amount of RAM for this, 128 megabytes. Now you can use dynamic RAM, and it will change the RAM to fit. I'm just going to put 128 and see what happens. Configure the networking. I want it connected to our virtual switch called Internet. It's going to create a virtual hard drive, 128 gigabytes, call it 8 gigabytes. Yeah, 8 gigabytes is enough because it's going to be thin provisioned. It won't matter. It'll only use what it uses. So we'll go next. So we're going to install the operating system later, but we're going to take it from the bootable CD-ROM drive D. Remember, because that's what we've got mounted on our HV1. We've mounted the ISO image into its virtual CD-ROM. So we'll just go next. Gives us a summary, and we'll go finish. Okay, so it's created our Zero Shell, and looking at the settings of the Zero Shell, there's a couple of things that that are good to do. I don't think we need this SCSI controller. No, I'm going to remove that. It's got one internet adapter, no diskette drive. The DVD drive, what we want to do is point it to a physical drive D. Okay. It's got a hard drive and then a DVD drive. Now the other thing that I want to do is, and in our BIOS we boot from CD. That's the order that it boots from there first. We've only got the 128 megabytes memory. The processor is the important part here. Now what I want to do is go compatibility mode, and because we're going to migrate this from one computer to another computer, it's a good idea to have it migrate to a physical computer with a different processor version. One server might have a different processor to another, so even though we've got a cluster of servers, they're not always going to have the same CPU. So, you know, for example, we might have one server that's got AMD Opteron processors and, you know, the other one's got Intel Xeon processors or something like that. So, having the ability when we migrate to have it handle the fact that it's might have different CPUs is the way to go. So that's just a little trick. to do. I think that all looks okay, so let's go okay on that. So when we start this up, it should boot up off the physical drive D, which is actually on our host's machine. It's actually an ISO that we've mounted. So let's connect to that virtual machine and start it. So just hit the start button. Failed to start. Not enough memory on the system to start the virtual machine. Could not initialize memory. Ran out of memory. Okay. So it didn't like the 128 megabytes of RAM. Let's have a quick look at what we've got running. We might have too many other things running at the moment. So what's this thing running? Let's get rid of that. We've got the HyperV, got the actual virtual machine, and we've got the failover cluster. How much RAM have we got running? More details. We're using 84% of the memory, so looking at the performance memory, we're only using 1.3 gigabytes. We've got 245 available. Okay, so let's give this another try. Start it. It says it's running. 4%. 128 megabytes. Let's connect to it. Yeah, it's running. So I didn't have to drop it down to 96 megabytes. So this is what we call nesting. It's pretty slow. Considering it hasn't got much memory, and I think we only gave 2 CPUs to the, maybe I gave it to 4, I'm not sure. Manage. I gave it 4 processors, but it's only got the 1.5 gigabytes of memory. Yep. Okay, so this thing's booted up off the ISO image that was in drive D. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to actually install it and get rid of the CD-ROM, because the CD-ROM will not migrate from one computer to another, but the virtual machine, which is stored on the clustered shared storage, will. So let's go to Installation Manager A. Let's do a 1 to install. Yes. And basically we're just going to hit enter for everything along here. And then what we'll do is we'll shut it down, take out the ISO image and do a reboot, so it's booted up off the VHD, off the hard drive. Make sure it gets out to the internet. I suppose one of the things that we could have done in here was to install, looking in player, we've got a install the VMware tools. The VMware tools might speed up the host machine as well. Anyway, doesn't matter. Do you want to create a profile? Call default profile, yes. Enter. Management interface is going to be that. It's going to assign 0.75, which we're going to, I'll just leave it what it is. Default gateway, leave it. Because we're going to change it to a DHCP, see if it gets an IP address from outside the network. Return to the command menu. I'm going to shut it down. H, yes. We'll shut it down properly, and then we'll remove the CD-ROM. Okay, so it's currently turned off. Okay, so let's look at the settings. So currently it's connected to the physical drive. Specify which method to use. Let's go none. Okay, and apply. So it currently says none, and it's off. So let's that's still running by the looks of it. So we'll go start. So now this is going to boot up off the hard drive rather than the CD-ROM image, because we took the CD-ROM image out. So this is just zero shell on in a HyperV virtual machine inside our 2019 HV1 server. I'm just using the zero shell because it's a tiny little operating system that runs in 128 megabytes of memory. Installs onto a hard drive. It's not taking up much space. I think less than 500 megabytes. We can web browse into it, and because it's got its own little web server, and we can also from the command line ping things and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to do. Let's go I for IP manager, and we can see that we've got an IP address of 0.75, so we're going to delete that. So I'm going to hit D for delete, ether 00, IP1, sure you want to delete it, type yes. So now it doesn't have an IP address. So let's go H for dynamic, ether 0 that, enabled. Let's see if it picks up an IP address, because it's currently connected to the internet virtual switch, and you can see it's picked up a dynamic IP address of 1.36. So that's actually getting it the virtual internet, the HyperV switch inside HyperV is connected to the physical card, which is our called internet, which is the one that's connected out onto my host's physical network card, and therefore out to the internet. So if I quit this and go to, it's a bit like Inception, everything's connected to everything. If I hit S for shell prompts, I should be able to ping 8.8.8.8 out to the internet, which I can. So that's out to the internet. Likewise, I can ping 192.168. it's got to be an 8, not a 9, 8.1.254, which is the gateway. It can also ping 233, which is the cluster. It can also ping 232, which is HV2. It can also ping 231, which is HV1. And it can also ping 230, which is the PDC. And if I have a quick look at what my host address is down here, my host's IP config address, I've got a 1.19 and a 1.20. I've actually got two IP addresses, two network cards. So back into here, let's ping 20 and ping 19. So it's got full connectivity to absolutely everything in the network and out to the internet as well. So at this particular point, if I look at my, I mean, I don't need to have that. Well, I could have that open. The IP address this has got is 1.36. So if I just go Control D, and IP manager is shows I've got 1.36, and that 36 is going to be an important number, because what we're going to do is we're going to set up lots of different pings to show what we're connected to. And when we turn particular machines off, you'll see that. So quit shell prompt. Let's get this just pinging out to the internet forever. And it'll do that. It'll just sit there forever pinging the internet. Okay, so that thing's sitting there pinging the internet forever. Instead of pinging the internet forever, maybe we can have it pinging my router or something like that. That might be safer, because it's not actually out to the internet. 192.168.1.254. Okay, so it's going to sit there pinging my router forever. Okay, minimize that out of the road. If I have a look at my failover cluster manager, what I want to do is have a look at virtual machines. So I could have actually created a new virtual machine in here. That's interesting. Refresh. Networks, they're all up. Disks. Configure a role. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to configure a role for this HyperV cluster for virtual machines. There it is. And you can see that it's found a running zero shell. I'm going to tick on that. So what we're doing is we're ticking this and we're configuring this for high availability. So that virtual machine is set up for high availability. Next. Okay, so successfully that's been set up for high availability. And you can view the report. Brings up Internet Explorer and tells you stuff in nauseating detail. And you can see that this is currently running on HyperV 1. There's nothing over here, is there? No, there isn't. That's it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a little connection here. Which is just going to be ping 192.168.1.36, which is our zero shell, minus T, so it just goes forever. Okay. So this thing's just going to ping my zero shell while my zero shell's pinging the router, which is what it's currently doing there. Okay. Okay. So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to go I can connect to it from inside here as well. So often I don't even need the HyperV. Okay, interesting. So, because you can just go move which because virtual machine is clustered. Oh, okay. Can't do that. It's got to be done in the clustering thing. What I'm going to do is minimize this thing out of the road. So in the clustering here on the nodes, roles, virtual machine. Okay. I wonder, I should be able to move that from in here. Move, live migrate. I'm going to select the node. I'm going to select it to go to HV2, which is the other node. So you can see here that it's actually, the operation did not complete on resource virtual machine. Okay. It's running. So why couldn't I live migrate that? It might be, you know, how this thing took a little, like, it struggled to start because of the amount of memory. So maybe this was the same thing. Didn't think it had enough memory. Okay, signed 128 megabytes of memory. Okay. Let's go and have a look. This is all set up the same. Oh, I don't think I had applied it. Maybe that's what the problem was. I hadn't actually applied it. So, yep, okay. Because I hadn't actually applied it, those settings weren't in place. Virtual switch is internet's the same. The HyperV settings are now set right. I hadn't actually hit apply. That was my problem. Okay. Let's just see how much memory we've got. Task manager. I'm hoping we've got around about the same. Memory, yeah, 1.3. Oh, it's only got 173 megabytes, but yeah, I'm only using 128, so in theory that should all work. Okay. HyperV. There's the failover clustering. The nodes, so we can see that it's been applied in HyperV 2 as what I did in HyperV 1. Okay, so let's see if I can tell this machine to move using live migration to HyperV 2. Operation did not complete on the resource. Okay. Memory demands 198. I don't think I had 198. Okay, so I think that's our problem, is we just don't have enough memory to actually migrate it, which sucks. Let's see if I can down this virtual machine and put it down into 96 megabytes of memory, and then run it back up again and see if I can reduce this memory demand. Okay, so let's go back to HyperV 1. So let's go, let's connect to it. We're already connected to it. Exit, let's go, we're already connected to it. Let's go Control C, Control D, back to the menu. H to shut it down, yes. Okay. So in a lot of ways, we don't even need to have the HyperV manager open, which that can reduce a bit of memory load as well. The failover cluster manager we want, it's the HyperV manager we don't. Or we do at the moment, because we want to edit the settings on the virtual machine. We want to change the amount of memory, change it back to 96 megabytes. Apply. We've got one processor, and we've got the compatibility set to, okay. Okay, let's see if it'll run in 96 megabytes of memory. So let's kill that. Let's see if we can open it. It's off at the moment. Let's connect to it and start it. So once this thing's up and running, you'll notice, well, the other thing you notice is over here, we're not getting a reply because it's not up. Now we're getting a reply. Okay, so this is running in 96 megabytes of memory. Let's go shell prompts. Click in there, shell prompts. Ping 192.168.1.254. So we've got it pinging out, this thing pinging in. It's running, it's still saying 182 megabytes of memory demand, even though I've only assigned 96 megabytes of memory. Okay, so this virtual machine, this server, HV1, performance, it's got 233 megabytes. So it's 183 works. Oh, actually, that's what it's got running now, even with all of this stuff running. Because this is the running performance right now. So I'm using 1.3 out of the 1.5. And I've got 160 no, I've got 200, that's non-paged pool, paged, committed, cached. It says available megabytes 200. Okay, what we've got to do is try and get our HyperV 2 to be able to take this. Okay. This is all because we have limited amount of memory. Okay, so this is HyperV 2. And you can see that it still knows that it's 182 megabytes. And looking at our task manager on this machine, it says we've got 195 megabytes. Let's just see whether it'll do it. Let's get rid of a few of these other things. Close that window, close the HyperV window. I've got two HyperV managers open. Kill that. I've got the failover cluster manager running, that's it. Okay, so I'm trying to reduce the amount of load on this machine. It says 347 available. Okay. Let's move it to live migrate. Select a node to HyperV 2. And it's on HyperV 2. If you have a look at this virtual machine, it's now, the owner is now HV2, and I did not lose a single ping from here. If I can connect to that, exit. Connect. I was just trying to see whether I could see what this thing was doing. Anyway, the important thing from here was that I didn't drop a ping at all over here. So let's live migrate this thing again. So let's move, live migrate, select the node, put it back to HV1. And it's that fast, it's back to HV. Oh, look, I lost one ping. Request timed out 1. So I lost one ping. Let's try that again. Flick it back to move, live migrate to HV2. 3% done. It's to HV2. And I didn't lose a ping. Not one. So it seems to be when it's going back to HV1, that it sometimes loses a ping. Live migrate, select the node to HV1. Let's keep an eye on this. 3%, 85% done. Lost a ping. Only one though. I think that's pretty good. Something that you can live with. If you had a client and you were moving a virtual machine from one server to the other, I think they would think, oh, okay, I lost a packet, one packet, and I think the networking would handle that. Okay, so what we should do is look at what happens if we do the high availability stuff. Okay, so what I'm going to do is it's currently on HV1. I'm looking at it from HV2. I am going to kill HV1. I don't know what's that for? Yeah. So this is HV1. And what I want to do is, can I just go pause, suspend the guest? So effectively I've just turned it off. And you can see I'm losing pings over here. And you can see that it's unmonitored. And what happens is, on here I think it keeps it for 3 minutes, and then it'll start it up on HV2 automatically. No, I've got a reply. No, I haven't got a reply. It just says request is still timed out. It's trying different network cards. Now this goes for 3 minutes. High availability is not like live motioning. High availability means that I don't get called out in the middle of the night to come and restart the server, because it's going to automatically start itself within 3 minutes on another server. Okay, and then the client will get connectivity back, but the machine is down for the time it takes essentially for this thing to realize that it's down and then to just go mount it back up again. So we can wait for the 3 minutes. and then it'll start up again. There is a way of changing that timeout role, like that it's shut down. I wonder whether it's this change startup. Click against that storage, because I'm on HV2 at the moment. Change startup. It's on medium at the moment. Maybe if I change that to high, it'll go faster. I think so. Okay, here's the tedious part. We're just waiting for 3 minutes. This is where we tell jokes or drink coffee or something like that. Do we know how long it's been down for? That would be useful if it actually had a counter that you could see. You can see every now and then the this thing flicker. So it's still pinging. Aha, look at that. It's starting and running on HV2. Now you'd see, I think over in here you can see it's still starting up. Now I haven't done anything to start that. It's waited 3 minutes and then started up automatically, and then this thing will reconnect. Assuming it gets the same IP address, of course. There you go. So that's high availability, where if your server shuts down within a set period of time, that virtual machine will restart on one of the other clustered servers. Now, we've only got 2 in this cluster, but the quorum acted as the umpire, so to speak, saying yes, it really is shut down. Okay, you can restart again. Now, if I unpause this virtual machine here, or the one I've turned the power off on, and restart it, it'll rejoin the cluster. But that doesn't mean the virtual machine will so I should be able to go power, restart the guest. So this is going to restart this virtual machine, but that doesn't mean that, because if you have a look at the nodes here, you can see that the HyperV is down until it restarts, and it'll show that it's back up again once it's done a reboot. Yep, see it's still restarting. Interesting to see how long it takes for this to show that it's back up again. Or do we have to hit refresh? Refresh. Still showing us down. I can remote desktop it from here actually, which is interesting. Pause, resume. More actions. Start the cluster service. Evict the machine. Show critical events, start the cluster service. Refresh. It's still down. See our cluster. One critical error, 7 warnings. Da 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 da. Okay. Nodes. Maybe it's still waiting for me to two's up. It really doesn't know about 1 yet. Okay. So let's restart it. Like log in. Okay, it had it failed. Okay, so what I want to see is this. I think when I clicked on the service over here, I ejected it because it no longer appeared. Interesting. Okay. So what I need to do is re-enable this the cluster service. Okay. So what I really want is services, don't I? .msc. So we can see here that a lot of this stuff is manually triggered. Let's tell this thing to go away. Clear all notifications. Target and SCSI. It's interesting that the actual failover cluster manager is not even in here anymore. Okay, add roles and features. It should be running. Next. Oh, I'm on the PDC. That's why. You're an idiot, Martin. Well, I'm not even on the right server. Ah, that's because it's not running. Okay. No wonder it's not coming up. HV1. I'm looking at the wrong machine. Restoring the virtual machine state. Okay. So, let's go to nodes. Let's do a refresh. And let's come back to here and do a refresh on this one. One node out of two is not running. Yes, I know. It's the node that's not running is, well, now it's up. Okay, so it did just require me to restart this machine, which I obviously hadn't done. Once I restarted it, it has actually come back in. And if I hit the refresh on this, go back out and come back in. What I should do is actually put that failover cluster manager down here. Oh, it is actually. Tools, failover cluster manager. Don't do that again. And let's get rid of the server manager now that we've got the cluster manager back up again. And let's look at the nodes. And it knows that it's back up again. Okay, so the little red dot on here says it has 6 critical errors, 17 6 critical. Warnings 8. That's probably because I've been because I killed the server and put it back up again and all sorts of stuff. Been mucking around with it. So I've caused it a few problems. Okay, so you'll notice that now I've got the HyperV 1 server back up and running, and it's in sync. And as far as HyperV 2 is concerned, it's in sync. It's all there. But the owner is still HV2, so it's not HV1. That's not to say that I can't move it back to HV1. I can. Lost 1 ping. That's what it does. When it's going from HV2 to HV1, it loses 1 ping. When it's going the other way, it doesn't. Okay, so that's probably where we should end at the moment for this video.